Okay, welcome everyone to week 2. This week we'll be solving equations involving multi-steps, and there will be a heavy focus on being able to graph linear equations, finding the slope, x-intercept, y-intercept. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to go over how to solve this equation that involves multi-steps. And the first thing that you want to do is your distributive property, which will tell you to multiply the 3 times the negative 17 and the negative 5 times the y and the negative 5 times the negative 3. So starting off on my left-hand side, 3 times y will give me 3y, and then 3 times negative 17 will give me negative 51. Then come to my right-hand side and multiply. That will give me negative 5y and plus 115. Because we have a negative times a negative, which makes positive. And now we want to get our variables combined on one side, so I would add 5y over to each side here. And that will give me 8y minus 51 equals 115. And then we would add the 51. Our goal here is to isolate the y. So we want to get everything with the variable on one side of the equation and the numbers without variables on the opposite side of the equal sign. So now the negative 51 and positive 51 cancels out on my left-hand side because that makes 0. So that leaves me with 8y equals 166. And now since I have 8 times y, I want to undo the 8 times y, and I would do that by dividing by 8. So 8 divided by 8 is simply 1, so they cancel each other out there, and that leaves me with y as equaling 20.75 when I divide 166 divided by 8. Now, normally if you have a problem that starts off with fractions, then you would leave your answer in fraction form. But since this one didn't have any fractions, then decimals are okay. I'll accept either one. Just be sure that you clearly demonstrate that you can translate from a fraction to a decimal. Okay, so on that one you should have gotten y equals 20.75. Okay, we'll come back to the graphing ones. This is another one of solving equations. In this particular problem, we have a lot of fractions. Again, the first thing we want to do is start off by using distributive property over here on my right-hand side. And when I come over here and multiply, I'll get 3/5 x. And then I'll multiply the 3/5 times 11 over 44 to give me 33 over 20. Now, you can continue to work with your fractions through this problem, but I'm going to teach you the method that the book shows, and that is to clear your fractions. And to do that, you want to find your least common denominator, or the least common multiple of your denominator. The first number that all 4 of these will go into is 120. So my least common denominator is 120. So I'm going to multiply both sides of my equal sign of my equation here by 120. Apologize, my pen is not working too well tonight. Alright, so you're using distributive property again, so you're taking the 120 and multiplying times each one of these. Now it's important to know that x over 3 is the same thing as 1 over 3x, 1/3 x. So when I multiply 120 times 1/3, I get 40. because 120 times 1 is 120 divided by 3 will give you 40. And then you do the same thing. Multiply the 120 times the top number, which is 5, and divide it by 8, and that will give you 75. Then come over to your right-hand side, same process. 120 times 3 divided by 5 will give you 72x. And then 120 times 33 divided by 20 will give you 198. Now, what that has done is cleared out all of my denominators, so I don't have to worry about finding common denominators to add my numbers. So now I'm back at the same place where we were in the problem just before. We want to get our x's isolated on one side of the equal sign. So I'm going to take this 72, and since it's positive, I'll subtract it over and come right over here under the other x on the left-hand side and subtract it there. And that's going to give me a negative 32x and then we'll add the 75 so we can have our x's on the left-hand side, the numbers without x's on the right-hand side. Again, I apologize for my pen is not working too well tonight. So I have negative 32x equals 273. Divide both sides by negative 32 because I have negative 32 times x, so I have to undo that. And I get x equals negative 273 over 32. Now, you need to make sure that you try not to leave negatives in your denominator. That's just one of the big math no-nos. So that's what I would leave it as. If I did change that to a decimal, it would be negative 8.53 or about negative 8.53. But since I started off with fractions, I just left my answer in fraction form. Okay. Now there's a heavy emphasis in this lesson on graphing. Graph the following equations, calculate the slope, x-intercept, y-intercept, and label the intercepts. Now I encourage you to go back and make sure you read all of the text on that in the book and the online text, and then come back and watch this video. The first thing I want to teach you or show you how to do is to calculate the slope. Now what you want to do, you want to get this equation in slope-intercept form. And slope-intercept form simply says that y will be on the one side of the equal sign by itself. Okay, so if I want to make an XY table, then it would not matter which x I picked, y would always be 7/4 or 1 3/4. If I went over 1 on the x-axis, went up 1, it would be 1 3/4. If I went 0, it's going to be 0, 1 3/4. So it would always be 1 3/4. So the key thing to remember, if you have y equals a number and there's no x involved in the equation, it will be a horizontal line crossing the y-axis at that number. So where we had y equals 1 3/4, slope would be 0, no x-intercept. Y-intercept, of course, would be 1 3/4 or 7/4. And that's how you would graph it. Okay. Now the reason that we use linear equations and graphing, we have some applications here. It could be to predict something that might happen in the future, or it could just be to show something that's happened over time, change that's happened over time. So in this particular problem, we have a furniture company that sells 3,000 chairs per week at $150 a piece. Says the price is lowered to $125 and the company sells 3,500 chairs per week. If the company wishes to liquidate its entire remaining inventory of 4,250 chairs next week, what price should they seek? Now, I'm sure there's several ways you can work this one, but keeping in mind that we're working with linear equations, I want to show you the method that we're going to use. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to set, instead of having an X, Y point, we're going to set this up into dollars in the place of X, and then chairs in the place of Y. So what I have, my first point, I'm going to make 2 points out of this, is that $150 per chair, I sell 3,000 chairs. That's my first point. My second point is at $125 per chair, I sell 3,500 chairs. Now, using the slope formula, and keeping in mind we're going to have this in place of X1 and Y1, and then we'll have this in place of X2 and Y2. Using the slope formula that's in your book and in the text, we'll find the slope first. We want to calculate the slope first. Okay. So my slope, we're going to do Y2 minus Y1, 3,500 minus 3,000. Divided by X2 minus X1, 125 minus 150. And that's going to give me 500 over negative 25, which will give me negative 20. So my slope, or M, is negative 20. That's my slope. And remember, slope is the same thing as the letter M in your equations. So now I'm going to take this, I'm going to plug my first point and my slope into my point slope form of the equation of a line. So point slope, and hopefully you've seen it by now, the equation is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Forgot to add a little bit of information up here. What we were asking for that last point, we were asking for 4,250 chairs. So that'll be in the y place because that's where my chairs are in my original point setting. So keep that in mind as we go through this problem. So now I'm going to substitute in to this equation, y minus 3,000 from that first point up there equals the slope I just found, which is negative 20, and x minus 150. Now, once you get this equation written, you can find out all the information you want to find. What I'm trying to find now is how much do I need to sell those chairs for if I want to sell 4,250. And keep in mind that y is representing chairs in this particular problem. So I'm going to replace that first y right there with 4,250, work this equation out, and then I'll know how much I need to sell each chair for. Distributive property over here, that's going to give you negative 20x plus 3,000. And now we're trying to solve this equation for x. So let's go ahead and combine these two right here to give me 1250 subtract your 3,000 over here. So when I subtract 3,000 from 1250, I'll have negative 1,750 equals negative 20x. And again, we're trying to isolate x, so I have negative 20 times x. So when I divide this by negative 20, 1,750 by negative 20, I get 8750 or 87.5. Now what that tells me is it tells me that next week, if I want to sell 4,250 chairs, my price needs to be $87.50 per chair. Now, is that the only method to work it? No, I'm sure not. But that's the method that I use because this chapter, or this week, we're focusing on equations of lines. Okay. Alright, now to find an equation in slope-intercept form passing through these points. Now we just kind of went through that. So what you need to do is to remember slope-intercept. First of all, that's when you have y by itself. The first thing you want to do is find your slope. You want to find out what your slope is. And you're going to use that slope formula again that we just used. And we'll have, here's my x1, here's my y1 because that's my first point, then here's my x2, and here's my y2 because that's my second point. So we're going to have y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. And when we subtract that out, we get 5.3 over 1.9. And when we divide those two, we get about 2.79. And I rounded mine to the nearest hundredth place. So we get about 2.79. That's my slope. That's m. Now we're going to plug it into that point slope form that we just went over. The y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So y minus y1 is 3.8 from this first point, equals m. Remember, m is slope, what we just found, 2.79 times x minus x1. So x1 is 7.2 from that first point. And that's your point slope form, but it's asking for your equation to be in slope-intercept. And remember, slope-intercept means that we're going to have y isolated on one side of the equation. So let's take care of this by, first of all, doing distributive property on my right-hand side to give us 2.79x minus 20.088. And that's an 8. Sorry about that. Alright, now we want to add 3.8 to both sides. And you'll come over here to where there is no x, because the 3.8 does not have an x, so it has to come over here with the other just regular number. And we'll add the 3.8 over there. And now we have y equals 2.79x minus 16.288. So here's our equation in slope-intercept form, y is by itself. Hopefully those example problems will help you out some as you get ready to get started. Remember that if you want to use the Easy Graph, there's a tutorial online for the Easy Graph on how to use that and how to copy and paste it into your Word document. So good luck with week 2. I think we had a good week 1, and I'm looking forward to a good jump on week 2. All right.